Ratio Christi, an apologetics organization here on campus. We just really want to welcome you guys and appreciate y'all coming out and supporting the organizations. Tonight I'm going to first introduce Mr. Ralph McBride. He put this all together. They're actually hosting these events across Beaumont and Orange, Texas, and they included our favorite McNeese State University as well. So we're very grateful. So without too much further ado, I'm going to introduce Mr. Ralph McBride.
Appreciate you guys coming tonight. My name is Ralph McBride, as Corey just mentioned. We're really a brand new organization. We're calling it Truth Unveiled. We're trying to minister to campuses in the Upper Gulf Coast area. We're going to be ministering to schools and colleges. LSCO, Lamar State College Orange, will hopefully be on the tour next time around. If you were given one of these forms, this will help us stay in touch with you.
Turn him up because he's
there's a red QR code. You got a phone, you can scan that. Go to that location and sign up for to win a set of iPods. We're giving away one set of iPods for all three events. We'll announce the winner next Monday night, and we'll give you the results of these polls. It can give you a feel for who came tonight, what sort of speakers you want to see in the future. It should be a lot of fun to especially the folks who win it. So I want to encourage you to scan that. If you don't have one, you can hand one to your friend, because obviously it's just a scan and the data. The back of this is just for emergency cases, in case someone has a phone that's not working or they can't get Wi-Fi. Again, this is the first event. This is Truth Unveiled, and we're really pleased to have the support of the VCM and also Rachel Christie and Chi Alpha. Blake couldn't be here, and neither could Tony, but Corey stepped in, and we appreciate that so much. Frank is one of the guys that I have been watching for many years. I see Frank as the unarguable best apologist for students in college. To me, if you're an inquiring person and you have questions about whether you should have faith or not, I want you to keep those top of mind, because tonight you'll hear a lot of answers. We want to hear your questions at the end. We want to truly make this a ministry, not just to the church, teaching you how to be a better apologist, but also especially to those who do not know Jesus and have not made that commitment. We want to make sure that your questions are answered. And without, as Corey said, further ado, help me give Frank Turek a great Southeast Louisiana welcome. God bless.
Thanks, Ralph. Good evening, Cowboys. Let's go back to September 29th, 2006. That's when Petty Officer Michael Mansour is a United States Navy SEAL operating in Ramadi, Iraq. Mansour is standing on a roof in Ramadi, and he's standing in front of a doorway to this roof. He has two Navy SEAL teammates lying in the sniper-prone position at his feet. They've already taken AK-47 fire and a rocket-propelled grenade, but they're not exactly sure where the enemy is. There's a bit of a lull in the fighting. Insurgents have blocked off the streets in Ramadi, and there's someone on the loudspeaker in the town mosque yelling, "Kill the Americans!" As Mansour and his team are looking for the next attack, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade up on the roof. It hits Mansour in the chest, and it falls to his feet. Due to the length of the throw, there's no opportunity to pick it up and throw it back. He has only a split second to make a decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, but if he does, his two teammates lying at his feet will surely die. Mansour yells, "Grenade!" But instead of jumping backward to save himself, he jumps forward chest first onto the grenade. It detonates. 30 minutes later, 25-year-old Michael Mansour is dead. His two teammates lying at his feet receive only minor injuries because Mansour's body muffled the blast. One of the survivors said at Monsoor's funeral, Mikey looked death in the face that day and said, "You will not take my friends, I will go in their stead." I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush invited Monsoor's parents into the East Room of the White House to give them their son's Medal of Honor posthumously. The president couldn't even get through the citation without breaking down. Since then, Monsoor's High School in Garden Grove, California, built a new stadium. They named it Michael A. Monsoor Memorial Stadium. The golden trident insignia that the SEALs wear dominates the 50-yard line. January 2019, North Island, California, just outside of San Diego, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Monsoor, the newest guided missile destroyer in the fleet. There's only 3 of these ships in the world, and one of them is named after Michael Monsoor. This is Monsoor's mother, Sally, being escorted onto the ship, named in honor of her fallen son. Now, why did they do this? Because Michael Monsoor literally sacrificed himself to save his friends. There's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself to save your friends, said Jesus of Nazareth before he went to the cross. Michael Monsoor sacrificed himself to save his friends. The question is, would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? And the answer is, someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But in today's culture, a lot of people don't think the story's true. They think it's invented. After all, it was written down by religious people. We know religious people can tend to embellish things. Also, it's got miracles in it, like a resurrection. How many people in this room or watching out there online have seen someone rise from the dead after you knew they were dead for at least 36 hours? Yeah, none of us. Why? Because it doesn't happen. And if you're a Christian, you have to believe something none of us have ever seen. How rational is that? Well, I actually think it's quite easy to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions honestly, I think you're going to realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity is true. Not just true for me, not just true for you, but true for everyone. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Now that is some pretty grooving music, isn't it? Yeah, that's actually from our TV show, which is on every Wednesday nights on DirecTV channel 378. If you don't have DirecTV, it's on Roku. Does anyone here have Roku? Roku? Okay. Look for National Religious Broadcasters, NRB TV on Roku at that time. If you don't have DirecTV and you don't have Roku, it's on this new technology sweeping Lake Charles, Louisiana right now. It's called the Internet. Have you guys heard of this? Yeah, it's right here on our website, crossexamined.org at that time. We're also on radio every Saturday mornings on the American Family Radio Network. I know there's a station here in Lake Charles, AFR. It's probably below 92 FM. I don't know, what is the actual frequency, does it? 90.5. So it'd be 9 a.m. on Saturday mornings and then 4 p.m. on Sunday afternoons, but you don't need to listen to it there. It's actually podcasted. It's called the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. We actually do 2 a week. Only one of them is broadcast on AFR. And what we do is we present evidence for Christianity, and we cross-examine ideas against it. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. And this is going to serve as our outline here tonight. We're going to go through these questions at about 10,000 feet. We can't go into a lot of detail, and then we'll get to your questions. But why is Why are these the 4 questions? Does truth exist? Why is that important? Because you hear people saying there's no truth. You got your truth. I got my truth. All truth is relative. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if there is no truth, then Christianity can't be true. Of course, if there is no truth, then atheism can't be true either, right? Now, of course, there's truth, ladies and gentlemen. Would you be going to this university if there wasn't any truth? I mean, why do you go to school? To learn truth, right? Not just someone's opinion. Would you ever read a book if there was no truth? Could you ever catch someone in a lie if there was no truth? No, lies presuppose truth. So, of course, truth exists. We'll get into that. Second question, does God exist? Obviously, Christianity can't be true if there's no God. I hope to show you tonight through 3 arguments that God really does exist. These arguments are in the Bible, but you don't need the Bible to know them. In fact, you can establish that God exists without any reference to any religious work. Did people know there was a God before there was a Bible? Yeah, of course they did. So we'll look at that. The third question is, are miracles possible? Obviously, Christianity can't be true if miracles are not possible. I just asked you if anyone's seen a resurrection. Nobody said yes. However, I hope to show you that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible, even atheists are admitting the evidence for. Then we're going to get to the key question, is the New Testament telling us the truth about the resurrection? Because look, the New Testament doesn't have a prayer if there's no truth, no God, or no miracles. But if truth exists, if God exists, if miracles are therefore then possible, then we can see if the evidence we have from the New Testament documents and even evidence outside the New Testament can let us know whether Jesus of Nazareth really rose from the dead. Because if he rose from the dead, game over, Christianity's true. If he didn't rise from the dead, game over, Christianity's false. In fact, Paul, writing to the church at Corinth, actually said, if Jesus hasn't risen from the dead, your faith is in vain. Do you realize that Christianity is a religious worldview you can investigate and discover whether or not it's true? It's not just someone's philosophy. It's based on historical events. Now, we don't have time to get to the point where we can show the Bible's the Word of God. The book gets into that, but if Jesus rose from the dead, it's pretty easy to show that the Bible's the Word of God. You say, how can that be? Well, I'll give you the short answer. If Jesus predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead, then he's God. And whatever God teaches is true. Jesus taught the entire Old Testament was the Word of God, and he promised the New Testament. You say, why trust Jesus? Look, I just have a personal policy. If somebody predicts and accomplishes his own resurrection from the dead, I just trust whatever the guy says. All right? But we don't have time to get all the way there tonight. We are going to start right here at point 1. Does truth exist? Are you guys ready to go? 3 cowboys are ready to go. Are you guys ready to go? All right. Now, whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand, and he said to him, Colonel, I want the truth. And Nicholson said, cowboys, you sound like princesses out there. If he said it that way, the movie would have gone nowhere. You can't handle that. That's not how he said it. Here's how he said it. You can't handle the truth. All right, let's try this again. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. Now that felt better, didn't it? Didn't you always want to do that here at the university? You know, say to some professor, you can't handle the truth. Well, you know, there's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative. Well, ladies and gentlemen, whether you're a Christian or an atheist or anywhere in between here tonight, what we're going to talk about in the next few minutes, I think, will be helpful. In fact, it's the most helpful thinking skill I've ever learned. And to show you what a dimwit I was 33 years old, I already had a master's degree, and I did not know what I'm about to tell you right now. And you know why I didn't know it? Because I never had a course in logic. How many people in here have had a course in logic, a real course in logic? Put your hands up. You see these people here with their hands up? These are the homeschoolers. There they are, right there. See that? We don't teach logic in public school. If we did, things would be a lot better. But instead of teaching kids how to think, we're teaching them what to feel. And that can be dangerous. Why? Because if you just follow your feelings, if you just follow your impulses, if you just follow your desires without logic or the restraint of morality, you're going to wind up in a very dark place. And you're going to drag a bunch of other people down there with you. Look, if you just follow your impulses, without logic, without moral restraint, you're eventually going to wind up addicted, broken, alone, and probably prematurely dead. If you want contentment, you got to go straight through truth. And as we'll see, Jesus is the truth. So you can't just follow your heart, as they say. You got to follow the truth. So, what I'm going to show you is a way that you can detect false statements in our society. This thinking skill has been so valuable to me, I didn't learn it until I got to seminary, when I had to take a course in logic. What we're going to use is the law of non-contradiction. It's just a fundamental law of all logic. It says opposite ideas cannot both be true at the same time and in the same sense. For example, we can't both be in Louisiana and not in Louisiana at the same time and in the same sense. We either are or we're not, but we're not both, right? God can't exist and not exist at the same time and in the same sense. Either exists or he doesn't, but not both. You guys with me so far? All right. So what we're going to do is show you some of these statements that actually violate the law of non-contradiction. And you're going to amaze your friends because you're simply going to be able to ask a question to show that person that what they believe is logically contradictory. And let me start by giving you this statement. Suppose someone were to say to you, there is no truth. This is the relativistic postmodernist claim, there is no truth. If someone would ever say that, you should ask that person a question. What should the question be? Yeah, is that true? If somebody says there's no truth, you want to stop and say, hey, is that true? Can everyone see that this is a self-defeating statement? What's a self-defeating statement? A self-defeating statement violates the law of non-contradiction. This statement tries to say there is no truth. At the same time, it's trying to say it's true itself. It would be like me saying I can't speak a word in English. If I were to say that, what would you say? Hey, man, you're using English to say it. Or it'd be like me saying my parents had no kids that lived. Or my brother is an only child. Right? These are self-defeating statements. And how do you detect self-defeating statements? Here's the thinking skill. What you want to do is you want to turn the claim on itself. Turn the claim on itself. So if someone says there's no truth, you turn the claim on itself and you simply ask, is that true? Now, once you get good at doing this, you're going to be able to detect false statements in our society in a very kind way because, again, you're not making statements. You're just simply asking questions. And this is going to save you and your hearers a lot of pain and suffering. Why? Because if you start living by statements like this, you're eventually going to smack up against reality and it's going to hurt. Let's just do a few more. So suppose someone were to say to you, there's no such thing as absolute truth. If you were to turn the claim on itself, what question are you going to ask back? Yeah, is that an absolute truth? Or you might want to ask, are you absolutely sure? Can everyone see that this is an absolute truth claim that actually claims there are no absolute truths? It's defeating itself. Again, it's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Now, in our culture, it's not said this way much anymore. It's more often said, or at least intimated, this way. There isn't the truth, only my truth. You know, you've got your truth, I've got my truth, you live your truth, I'll live my truth, we'll all get along. This sounds like we all ought to believe this, right? This sounds so right. This sounds so Oprah, doesn't it? There's just one big problem with it. It violates the law of non-contradiction. Why? Well, if somebody says, there isn't the truth, only my truth, if you turn the claim on itself, you should ask that person, is that just your truth or the truth? In other words, is the statement on the top just your truth? If it is, if it's just your opinion, okay, why should I believe it? But if you're saying the statement on the top is the truth for everybody, can everybody see that this statement right here, the first half of it, says there aren't any the truths? Can everyone see this is a the truth claim, claiming there are no such things as the truths? It defeats itself. Now, I know this is very unpopular in our culture to say this, but I have to say it anyway. There's no such thing as your truth. There's no such thing as my truth. There's just the truth. I mean, if you want to say you have your own truth, you might as well say I have my own math. I mean, imagine if Ralph asked me, if he said, hey, Frank, can you hang around McNeese State tomorrow? I got a lot of work we need to do here around the university. In fact, if you stay tomorrow, I'll pay you $10 an hour. At the end of the day, you just tell me how much you worked and I'll pay you. Now, actually, Ralph would never do this. He doesn't pay that much. All right. But anyway, let's suppose I did. Let's suppose I stayed tomorrow. We worked here for 15 hours tomorrow, and I'm done. And he goes, okay, what do I owe you? I say, okay, 15 hours times $10 an hour, you owe me $150,000. He's going to say, $150,000? No, I owe you $150,000. And I say, oh, no, you don't understand. I have my own math. What's he going to say? You're crazy. There's not my math or your math. There's just math. Now, parents, I'm not talking about the kind of math your kid brings home and you go, hey, this isn't my math. I'm not talking about that, all right? Look, there's not my answer to a math problem and your answer, right? There's the answer. The same thing is true when it comes to truth. Either God exists or he doesn't. It's not my truth or your truth. Either Jesus rose from the dead or he didn't. It's not my truth or your truth. So don't buy into the idea that there's just your truth and there's no the truth. This is another one you're going to hear in our culture quite a bit. You ought not judge. In fact, Jesus said, don't judge. Why are you judging, you hypocrites? All right, let's leave Jesus aside for just a second. Logically, what's the problem with this claim? If somebody says, yeah, what question are you going to ask back? Yeah, if they say, you ought not judge, you're going to say, hey, isn't that a judgment? Or you might want to say, if we're not to judge, then why are you judging me for judging? Notice this is a judgment here. You say, wait a minute, Frank, didn't Jesus say don't judge? Nope, never said it. Oh, Frank, sure he did. He said it in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. This is in the middle of his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. All right. I know this is going to sound odd for just a second, but stick with me. It's true. There are no verses in the Bible. There are no verses in the Bible. Do you think when Matthew was writing his biography that we now call a gospel, when he got to judge not, he said, here's chapter 7, verse 1. No. When were the chapter and verse divisions put in? About 500 years ago to help us navigate the text, which is really important, right? It'd be really hard to find your way around this big series of books we put under one binding we call the Bible if you didn't have numbers. I mean, imagine if you didn't have numbers in your Bible and some pastor didn't have numbers in his Bible and you went to church and he just opened this big book and he looked at you and he said, let's go about 2/3 of the way in. Let's see if we can find the same spot, right? You go, no, you can't do that, right? You need numbers to find your way around. The problem is we tend to think if it's got a number in front of it, we can take it out and make it say whatever we want. You can't do that. You got to know the context of the passage to figure out what it means and then how it applies to you. And by the way, now some of you are going to hate me for this, but I don't care. I'm leaving tomorrow, okay? This is why you Christians in here should never say Jeremiah 29:11 is a promise to you. What's Jeremiah 29:11? You know Jeremiah 29:11. Oh, the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, plans to give you hope in a future. I mean, this is on coffee mugs. This is on pillows. This is on birthday cards. This is on posters. Is this a promise to 21st century Christians living in Lake Charles, Louisiana? No, who's that a promise to? That is a promise to the ancient Judaites who were taken forcibly by Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian dictator, in 586 BC. He took them to Babylon, modern-day Iraq, and God, through the prophet Jeremiah, was promising those people that 70 years later, God would prosper them and bring them back into the land. And that's exactly what happened, by the way, in 516 BC. They began to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. But it's not a promise to us today. In fact, when people say, I'm claiming Jeremiah 29:11 as a promise to me, I always say, why don't you claim Jeremiah 44:11 as a promise to you? What's Jeremiah 44:11? Jeremiah 44:11 is the promise that God made to the exiles that went to Egypt in 586 BC. And he warned them, don't go to Egypt. You know what Jeremiah 44:11 says? It says, I will destroy you and all Judah. You don't see that stitched into a pillow. You don't see that on a coffee mug. You don't see that on a birthday card, happy birthday. I will destroy you and all Judah. That is so sweet, Grandma. Thank you so much. Why are we doing this? Why are we taking stuff out of context? Look, the Bible is not a book of Proverbs. Yes, there is a book of Proverbs where you can just take a verse and get a nugget of wisdom from it. But you can't do that with the rest of the book. You need to figure out what's going on in there to interpret it properly. And the same thing is true in Matthew chapter 7. Does Jesus just say, judge not, and he stops right there? No, what does he say? Judge not, lest you be judged. By the same standard you judge others, you be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, you hypocrite. Notice that's a judgment there, you hypocrite. Take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. Then he goes on to talk about don't cast your pearls before swine, which requires a whole other series of judgments. Is Jesus telling us not to judge there? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. That involves making a judgment. He's simply saying, get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge. It's actually a command on how to judge. In other words, don't judge hypocritically. If you've got that problem, fix it, then go help your brother. But it would be completely ridiculous to say don't make judgments. Why? Well, number one, it's a judgment itself. Number two, you'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. You made 100 judgments just getting over here tonight. And now you're going, this was a bad judgment. This guy's crazy. What's going on? No. Atheists make judgments. They judge there's no God. The Bible's not telling the truth. There is no objective right and wrong. There's no objective meaning to life. In fact, when you die, you're just going to become worm food. It's hopeless. Have a nice day. These are all judgments. The question isn't whether or not you can make judgments. The question is, are your judgments true? I will say this, Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. I mean, who were the judgmental ones in his day? The Pharisees. And who were the Pharisees? What did they do? Well, some of them were on the Jewish ruling council known as the Sanhedrin, to whom Rome delegated day-to-day lawmaking authority. In other words, these religious leaders were also politicians, and Jesus went after these people. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes! And he wasn't so nice doing it. In fact, if you think Jesus was a sweet guy who's never said a bad word about anyone, you have not read John chapter 2, John chapter 8, or Matthew chapter 23. What happens in John chapter 2? Jesus makes a whip, and he goes and he jacks people up in the temple. Sweet and gentle Jesus did this? Yes. And then in John chapter 8, he's having an argument with the Pharisees, these religious politicians, and he's right in the middle of an argument with them when he says, your father is the devil. Jesus, you can't say that. That's not very Christ-like. Excuse me, I am Christ? Do you imagine you're having an argument with somebody and you stop and you say, your father is the devil? Never try that with a sibling, by the way. And then in Matthew chapter 23, Jesus really unloads on these politicians. He goes, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside. You're whitewashed tombs, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make them a convert, you make them twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell? What? Sweet and gentle Jesus said this? Yes, Jesus was not Barney. Can't we all get along, boys and girls? No. In fact, I came to bring a sword. It's going to divide mother and daughter, father and son. Jesus did not come to bring peace. Not with the world. He came to bring unity in the church, but not with the world. In fact, many of you know those passages are true because you're divided in your own family over Jesus. And you should be. If Jesus is God, and he is, you ought to be following him, despite what your family or your culture or your friends say. By the way, one other thing Jesus said to these people, these politicians, it's easy to remember, it's Matthew 23:23. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You're tithing your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you've neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. What's he saying here? He's saying, you're tithing your spices, you're paying attention to the little things, but you're neglecting the bigger issues. And we're doing that in this country right now. We're telling people what light bulbs they can and can't use, but we won't say don't murder your children. In fact, Kamala Harris wants to ban plastic straws, but she doesn't want to ban child mutilation. Is she neglecting the more important matters of the law? Yeah, think about this when you go vote, ladies and gentlemen. Look, I don't like either candidate. But when you look at the more important matters of the law, vote according to those. Certainly banning plastic straws while neglecting child mutilation is neglecting the more important matters of the law. And remember, you're not voting for one person, you're voting for 5,000 people to go to Washington and implement an agenda, a platform. Read the platforms and see what's closer to the Bible on the big issues. You're not going to get everything you want. Nobody ever does. In fact, if you think your candidate has to agree with you 100% on everything, you don't even do that in real life. Any of you in here married? Do you get 100% of what you want? No, you didn't. Neither did she, neither did he. None of us are perfect. But on the bigger issues, you ought to be in agreement. So don't buy into this idea that you can't make judgments. You've got to make judgments. But you've got to make judgments without being judgmental. Do you know that nobody in this room and nobody watching out there is going to get to God because you're better than anyone else? The only reason you're going to be in God's presence is not what you do for him, but what he's done for you. What Jesus did on the cross is what gives us access to God. So we've got to make judgments without being judgmental. Somebody put it this way, that evangelism is just one beggar showing another beggar where the food is. We're not better than anyone else. We're still going to need Jesus to get to heaven. Now, we could spend more time if we had it, but we don't because there are many more self-defeating statements out there, but we got to sum the whole thing up this way. Can everyone see that this statement right here shoots itself? Can everybody see that? To say there's no truth is a truth claim. It defeats itself. This is why relativism and postmodernism are false, because they claim it's true that there is no truth. Tragically, most of our universities and many of our high schools have bought into relativism. That's why we go to campuses to present the truth, hopefully, that there is truth, God does exist, miracles are possible, Jesus did rise from the dead, and the Bible is true. In fact, here's an event we did at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and they love the Bible there about as much as the University of California at Berkeley does. And we always have a mic set up. We'll have the mic set up here a little bit later for Q&A. And I ask people who are not Christians a question sometimes, and it's not fair for me to spring that on you, but I'm going to tell you right now what the question is so you can think about it if you ask a question and you're not a Christian. Here's the question. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had atheists stand at that microphone in front of hundreds of people and say, no. No? I thought you claimed to be reasonable. I thought you claimed to be rational. How is it reasonable that you wouldn't believe something that was true? Because it's not a matter of reason. It's not a matter of the head. It's a matter of the heart. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. Why? Because they want to be God over their own lives. They're not on a truth quest. They're on a happiness quest. And they're just going to believe whatever they think is going to make them happy. Here's the problem. You can make yourself happy over the short term, doing a lot of fun, but ultimately selfish, sinful, and destructive things. Yet over the long term, it's a disaster. And the few people in this room over 40 know what I'm talking about, because many of us have tried it ourselves, right? No. You can't just do whatever. You can't just follow your feelings all the time. Who's going to put up with that? Life is all about you all the time? Yeah, see how far you get. You got to follow the truth, not whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it. So get ready. I may ask you that question, all right, when we get to Q&A. But let's move on to the second question. We know that truth exists. It'd be self-defeating to say there isn't. The next question, is it true that God exists? And I mentioned 3 arguments we're going to look at. There are more arguments for God than this, but we're just going to quickly look at 3. The first argument for God is called the cosmological argument. It comes from the beginning of the universe. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. It says if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose. And it says if there's design in the universe and design in life, there has to be a designer. Now, these two arguments have some scientific evidence behind them. All that evidence, or much of that evidence, is in the book. The third argument doesn't have much science behind it. It's more philosophical in nature. Yet it's the argument you've known since you were a very small child. It's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one. Like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in the Holocaust, or it's wrong to walk into a school and shoot 9-year-olds, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond humanity, a standard of righteousness that we're obligated to obey, then everything's just a matter of opinion. That's just your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion, or your opinion against Hitler's opinion, or your opinion against some school shooter's opinion. Well, we know these things aren't just a matter of opinion. It's really wrong to murder people. If that's the case, there must be a standard beyond us, a standard of goodness and righteousness that we're obligated to obey. That is what we mean by God's nature. If there is no God, then nothing's ultimately right or wrong, but we all know things are right and wrong. In fact, I don't know if you've noticed this recently, but it seems like in our country, people seem to be inventing new rights every 10 minutes. And many of these people are atheists. They claim they have rights, but they have no justification for these rights. Do you know that if there is no God, there's not only no right to abortion, there's no right to life. There's not only no right to same-sex marriage, there's no right to natural marriage. There are no trans rights, there are no Christian rights, there are no human rights, there are no rights of any kind unless God exists. Everything is just a matter of opinion. And I don't think there's anybody in this room or anybody out there watching who really thinks murder is just a matter of opinion and you don't have a right to life. Now, we don't have time to go through that argument tonight. We can deal with it during the Q&A. We're going to just spend a little bit of time on the cosmological argument. Now, you got to admit, it was worth coming here tonight just to see God do that. Did you see that? Some of you said, I've never seen God move. Oh, really? Check this out. Look at that. Now, this is the argument that many say points back to the big... Now, I know some of you are going, Frank, we're Christians in here, and we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, even atheistic scientists are admitting the universe had a beginning. Stephen Hawking, who was probably the top physicist in the world until he died about 6 years ago, who, as you know, was a medical miracle. He got ALS early in life, and somehow he lasted for decades with it. Normally, it'll kill you in a couple of years. Anyway, here's what Hawking said. He said, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. So he's an atheist. He doesn't have an explanation for this, but he's admitting the universe had a beginning. And even agnostic cosmologists will say the same thing. This is Alexander Vilenkin from Tufts University. He wrote this in his book, Many Worlds, in 2006. He said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists, by the way, a cosmologist is not someone that puts on your makeup. All right, a cosmologist is someone that studies the universe. Cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. There's two interesting words to me in this quote. The first is the word proof. It's unusual for scientists to use the word proof. Why? Because science, by definition, is tentative. There can always be new information that comes in and overturns an existing theory. I know you can't trust everything in Wikipedia, but if you go to Wikipedia, you will find a page of overturned scientific theories. There's scores of these scientific theories. Because new information has come in and said, we thought we were right here, but now we're not. But Vilenkin is so convinced by the evidence, he's willing to call it a proof. The other interesting word is the word problem. Why is it a problem that there's a cosmic beginning? Because for scientists who think everything happens by natural law couldn't have created the universe. Why? Because there was no nature. Nature's the effect, it can't be the cause. So this creates a problem. We'll get to it in a minute. Now, we're not going to go through the evidence for this. Why? Number one, we don't have time. Number two, it's all in the book, chapter 3. And number 3, it's not controversial. Even the atheists are admitting the universe had a beginning. What is controversial is what caused the universe to have a beginning. We'll look at that in just a minute. But I want to give you a philosophical argument, which I think shows beyond any doubt that the universe did have a beginning. And in order to show that, let's look at this timeline. Here's today right there, the present. There's yesterday, there's the day before yesterday, there's last week, right? Let's say we don't know when this timeline started. Here's the question. Can this timeline be infinite into the past? Can it? This is the interactive portion of the program. Why can't it be? You're sounding like Charlie Brown's teacher right now. Wah, wah, wah. But why does it have to have a beginning? That's science. This is philosophy. We'd have never gotten here, says John, right? We never would have gotten to this day. Look, if there were an infinite number of days before today, would you ever get to this day? No, because you'd always have to live another day before you got to this day. Why? Because there's an infinite number of days before this day. But since today is here, there can only be a limited number of days before today, which means time had a beginning. If time had a beginning, what could have created time? Only something outside of time, something timeless. So what caused the timeless cause? Nothing. Why? Because the timeless cause didn't have a beginning itself. This answers the question, who created God? If this is God who creating time, if you're outside of time, you didn't have a beginning, which means you didn't have a cause. In fact, let's sum it up this way. If the past were infinite, today never would have arrived. Now, some of you are looking at me like you have intellectual constipation. I know, okay? But just think about this. There can't be an infinite number of days before today, so there must be a beginning to time. This is also called the Kalam cosmological argument. But let's just jump to the bottom line. Here it is. If the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. We've got two options. This is what the evidence gives us. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Here's my only question. Which view is more reasonable? What do you think? And number 2 is more reasonable because you got a miracle with a miracle worker. I once had someone say number 1 is was more reasonable. But how do you have a miracle with no miracle worker? By the way, do you realize that everyone believes in at least one miracle? Christians believe in this miracle, but many others, atheists, believe in one miracle. What miracle do they believe in? They believe that no one created something out of nothing. Which view takes more faith? Someone created something out of nothing, or no one created something out of nothing? What do you think? Yeah, number 1 takes more faith, more blind faith anyway. In fact, you know what Stephen Hawking's explanation for the beginning of the universe was? This is in the last book he wrote in 2010 called The Grand Design. This is from page 180, and here's what he says. Because there's a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Hello, McFly. Can you create yourself out of nothing? And does gravity create anything? You know, gravity didn't even exist until the space-time continuum came into existence. Now, after Hawking said this, because there's a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing, the esteemed philosopher John Lennox from Oxford University, also a Christian, said this: when brilliant scientists talk nonsense, it's still nonsense. Yeah, it's nonsense to think that the universe is going to create itself by the law of gravity somehow. The best explanation is that if space, time, and matter had a beginning, the best explanation is something outside of space, time, and matter created it. In other words, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create. Why? To go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. Also, the cause would have to be intelligent to have a mind to make a choice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? God. You say, well, how do you know it's the Christian God, Frank? We don't. Yet. This could be Allah or some other theistic or deistic God. There's no one argument from science that gets you all the way to Jesus. But if we keep going through the evidence and we realize that Jesus really did predict and accomplish his own resurrection from the dead, then we can say that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,991 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. We haven't gotten there yet, but we have 6 attributes from this one argument that could be the God of the Bible. You with me so far? All right. Now, a good question to ask an atheist is, if there is no God, why does anything exist? Why do you exist? Why do I exist? Why do the Dallas Cowboys exist? That's like, if God, why evil? Right? Sorry, Cowboy fans. Now, why does anything exist if there's no God? There has to be an uncaused first cause. The universe had a beginning. It must be something outside the universe that is the uncaused first cause. Now, I mentioned 2 other arguments. We don't have time to go into detail on these, but let me just mention one thing about the teleological argument, the design argument. There are 2 aspects of it. One is the universe appears to be designed. Second, you appear to be designed. Life appears to be designed. I want to say one thing about the universe being designed, because even atheists admit this is probably the hardest argument to answer. Even people like Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss, these are hardened atheists. Christopher Hitchens, who I debated many years ago, who was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. Right, he said this is a hard one to answer. The fine-tuning of the universe shows that there are many attributes about our universe and our solar system that are exactly the way they need to be for life to exist here on Earth. That if you were to change any one of a number of them, virtually imperceptibly, we wouldn't exist. I'm just going to give you one, just so you can think about this. The ratio of gravity to the strong nuclear force is fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 40th power. You say, 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? What does that mean? It means 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I, so let me give you an illustration. Take the entire North American continent from Central America all the way to Greenland, and then stack it in dimes all the way to the moon. That's 238,000 miles. And then do that on 1 billion other North American continents. Stack it in dimes all the way to the moon. Take those billion piles of huge dimes, put them in one humongous pile, mark 1 dime red, mix it in, throw a friend on that huge pile, blindfolded, ask him to pick 1 dime at random. The chance he would pick that 1 marked red dime is 1 chance in 10 to the 40th power. Is he going to pick that dime? No. You have to have a lot of faith to believe he's going to pick that dime. Those are the kind of odds that you need to believe, the kind of faith you need to have to think there wasn't a designer behind this universe. It takes a lot more faith to say there is no God than to say there is. And that's just one out of a dozen or so from the universe and about 100 about our solar system. Change any one of them, we don't exist. All right? So, we know that truth exists and God exists. In fact, if we were to add up the 3 arguments, cosmological, teleological, and moral arguments, we would discover that there is a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things to this very moment. This is the God of biblical Christianity, and we haven't even opened the Bible yet. You can show there's a God without reference to the Bible. Now again, you don't know if this is Jesus or not, but it could be Jesus. This is called natural theology. In fact, God has written 2 revelations. One is his word, but the other are his works. And everybody has his works. Creation, conscience, design. We can see all that, whether you have a Bible or not. In fact, when people ask me, how do I know that God exists? Here's what I say. I know God exists by his effects. If there's a creation, and there is, that's the effect, I'm reasoning back to a cause, a creator. If there's design in the universe and design in life, those are effects. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a designer. If there's a moral law written on the heart, a certain standard of right and wrong, that's an effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a moral lawgiver. If I have the ability to reason, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause for reason, a great mind. If there's evidence that a man predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause. Who could cause somebody to predict and accomplish his own resurrection from the dead? Only somebody like God. In fact, you're doing the same thing. If you think you've had some sort of experience with God, if you think God has answered a prayer, or you think God has somehow communicated to you outside the Bible, you're doing the same thing. You're saying the answered prayer or the communication is the effect, and you're reasoning back to a cause. You're saying it's God. This is what scientists do, ladies and gentlemen. They reason from effect to cause. That's why theology is the queen of all sciences. Because you're trying to see how all the effects we see around us are explained by the ultimate cause, the uncaused first cause. So you're reasoning from effect back to cause. The problem with atheism, they have no cause. Even the natural laws that they say do everything, they're effects. Where do laws come from? They come from lawgivers. You ever wonder why the laws of nature are so consistent and persistent? Why do they do the same thing over and over again? Because there's a mind behind them that not only created them, but keeps them going. That's why we can do science, because the natural world is reliable and consistent. If the natural world wasn't reliable and consistent, we couldn't detect cause and effect. We couldn't do science. And by the way, the natural laws, being reliable and consistent, are the only way we can detect miracles. So we know that truth exists. We know that God exists. The next question is, are miracles possible? Well, if God exists, of course miracles are possible, but how do we detect them? Here's the problem when people think about miracles. We think that some miracles are impossible. In fact, Noah and the ark. Christians, few Christians in here, can we just agree on something? Noah and the ark is crazy. Come on, admit it. How about a resurrection? I asked you before if anyone's seen a resurrection. Nobody said yes. Yet if you're a Christian, you have to believe something none of us have ever seen. And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? What is the deal with? Can you really believe in Jonah, ladies and gentlemen? Well, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? No, it's not the resurrection. The greatest miracle in the Bible is... I got some of you a second time. Yeah. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. And here's the interesting thing. Even the atheists are admitting the evidence for the first verse. They don't think it's God, but what else could it be? It's got to be a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent creator. That's what the evidence is showing us at this point. Now, if God does exist, and if he did create the universe out of nothing, can he do any of these other miracles? Of course Noah's crazy, unless God exists. Of course Jonah's a fairy tale, unless God exists. Of course resurrections don't occur, unless God exists. These are at least possible. You just can't rule them out as so many people do. And I mentioned earlier that the only way we can detect a miracle is if natural laws do what they do consistently and persistently. How are we going to detect a miracle without the backdrop of repeatable natural laws? Miracles stand out to us because they happen rarely. They're exceptions to what happens regularly. They're rare events. Now, I know some people will say, well, I can't believe in miracles because I've never seen one. That's not a good reason to necessarily disbelieve something. Why? Because you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. You believe in your mind. Have you ever seen it? You're using it right now. You believe in the laws of logic, the laws of mathematics. Have you ever seen those? No, you're using them all the time. You believe in justice. Have you ever seen justice? Oh, you may have seen people treated justly or unjustly, but you've never seen justice in itself because it's not a physical thing you see. It's an immaterial reality, an immaterial virtue grounded in the nature of God. Do you realize if there is no God, there's no such thing as justice? Everything's a matter of opinion. There's nobody who can ultimately do justice because a lot of people get away with stuff and they go to their graves. You would need somebody like God to able to met out justice. You've never seen love, and everybody believes in love. In fact, in that debate I had with Christopher Hitchens, the second one, some kid from the college in New Jersey asked Christopher this question. Christopher, what is love? And Hitchens, being a materialist, thinking that there's nothing immaterial out there, you know, you don't have a soul, you just have a body, you don't have a mind, you just have a brain, you're nothing but a molecular machine, you're nothing but a moist robot. That's what most atheists believe today. Hitchens, thinking all there were molecules, had to come up with a material answer for what is love. So he eventually said, love is a chemical. And I said, don't tell that to your wife. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? Because I got the chemical today. You know, tomorrow I might not have it. No, love is not a chemical. Love is an immaterial reality grounded in the nature of God. It's not something you see, though. It's not a physical thing. Now, we have a big error in our culture today, a big misunderstanding. We think love means approval. Love does not mean approval. In fact, I can approve it to you. How many parents do we have in here? All right, how many former children do we have in here? Okay, good. That's all of us then, right? Here's the question. If your parents approved of everything you wanted to do when you were 13, would they have been loving parents? No. A parent needs to stand in the way of evil if he or she's going to love that child. You just can't approve of everything. That's not loving. That's enablement. You don't just approve of what people want to do when it's going to hurt them or others or be against God's will. That's not love. That's enablement. Yet we hear people all the time saying, well, you know, if you love me, you'd approve of what I do. Yet they don't approve of you, do they? You notice that? This is true on the sexual issues. You know, if somebody comes out or something, you're supposed to celebrate. And if you don't, you're unloving. No. You'd be unloving to celebrate if it's something against God's will. You need to stand for truth. You know, in the passage that everybody reads at their wedding but nobody obeys, 1 Corinthians 13, Paul says, love always protects. Love does not rejoice in wrongdoing. Love rejoices in the truth. Love always perseveres. If you love somebody, you're going to do whatever you can to help them, not to enable them to do something evil. In fact, too often we tell them what they want to hear to protect ourselves, don't we? We don't want them mad at us, so we tell them what they want to hear. Here's what Thomas Sowell said, who now at 94 years old still says everything well. Sowell said this, when you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. How often do we tell people what they want to hear because we don't want them mad at us? We're not helping them. We're loving ourselves, but we're not loving them. No, love doesn't mean approval. By the way, you've never seen gravity either. Oh, Frank, there it is. There's gravity right there. Nope. You're not seeing gravity. What are you seeing? You're seeing the effects of gravity. We really don't even know what gravity is. Do you know that? You've never seen George Washington. Yet you believe he existed. Why? Because he's left effects behind that are best explained by a man who lived from 1732 to 1799. And you've never seen Jesus in the flesh either, yet you believe he existed. Why? Because he's left effects behind that are best explained by Jesus of Nazareth. So don't buy into this idea that you have to see something to believe it. You can see effects and go, yep, that thing exists. And do you realize, by the way, that for Christianity to be true, miracles do not need to happen today? Miracles could have stopped in the first century and Christianity would still be true. I think miracles still go on, but you don't need them to show that Christianity is true. You know, for atheism to be true, however, every single miracle claim and spiritual experience in the history of the world has to be mistaken, has to be false. Is that possible? Well, it's possible. Is it reasonable to believe? No. Even demonic activity, that has to all be false too. You know demons exist. Just watch the news. And by the way, if miracles do occur today, you ought not to see many of them. Why? Because they have to be rare to get our attention. That's what miracles do. They get our attention. And in the Bible, they're there to show that somebody speaks for God. Like Moses or Elijah and Elijah or Jesus and the apostles. They can do miracles because God is saying, listen to these people. But if miracles occurred all the time, they wouldn't be effective to get our attention. I mean, imagine if resurrections occurred routinely. What would the resurrection of Christ mean? Nothing. You go to somebody and you go, hey, Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle Leroy just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back, right? No, it's got to be a rare event if it's going to get our attention. And if you read people like David Hume, who was a big skeptic on miracles back, 250 years ago, he gets it all wrong. He claims that it can't be true because it's a rare event. Well, that's what a miracle is. It has to be a rare event to get our attention. If it's not rare, it doesn't get our attention. In fact, there are things that happen every day that are so spectacular, but because they happen every day, we don't really get their significance. Like, for example, how many people in this room have ever seen your own flesh and blood born? Every mother should raise your hand, maybe just some of the fathers I'm asking. Now, when you see your own flesh and blood come out of you or another person, you don't go, evolution, right? You go, this is amazing. We made whoopee 9 months ago, and now look at this. How did this happen, right? It happens every day. We don't call it a miracle, but we have to understand somebody designed this. This doesn't just happen. This is spectacular. But since it happens every day, we often get jaded. In fact, a biologist by the name of Ariel Roth said, God never did a miracle to convince an atheist because his ordinary works provide sufficient evidence. Just look at the person next to you. Why is that person even conscious? How can this person even think? How can this person make decisions and act? This is amazing. All right, so we know miracles are possible. The greatest miracles already occurred. Now let's talk about, is the New Testament true, particularly about one event, and that is the resurrection. We know that truth exists, God exists, and miracles are possible. Did this miracle happen? And in the book, we have the top 10 reasons we know the New Testament writers told the truth. We don't have time for 10. We're just going to briefly look at 2, which I think, when you combine them with the others, show beyond any reasonable doubt that Jesus rose from the dead. And the first one we're going to talk about are embarrassing stories. What are embarrassing stories? Historians know that if there's something embarrassing to the author or authors in the text, it's probably true. Why? because you're not going to invent things that embarrass you. You might invent things that make you look good, but you won't invent things that make you look bad. In fact, let me prove it to you. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good, and it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? No, you don't do that. You might lie to make yourself look good, but you won't lie to embarrass yourself. Now, the New Testament writers, and this is true of the Old Testament as well, but the New Testament writers have filled the New Testament with embarrassing details about themselves, about even Jesus, we'll see, that shows they never would have invented this. That's why we call this the duh factor. They're not making this up. Let me just give you a few of these. Notice that Jesus calls the leader of the disciples, Peter, Satan. That's embarrassing. I mean, do you think Mark, who wrote this down, at one point said to Peter, hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. Look, this is embarrassing. And then Peter says, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. And then at the crucifixion, all the disciples, maybe with the exception of one, they all run away for fear of the Jews. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away! Right? They all run away. And who are the brave ones? Huh? The women. That's right. The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote the New Testament documents down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? I mean, if I was there and inventing it, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I mean, I'd write down something like this. We marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. Yeah, that sounds good. John said, get out. Peter roundhouse kicked him. Thomas said, we'll be back. No doubt. Some of you will get that tomorrow. And then on Sunday morning, we marched right down to the tomb, and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say I was Mr. Sissy Pants while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses in that culture? Forget about the fact it was embarrassing to men. It was. But why would you say the women were why would you never say this if you were making up? Why would you never say the women were the first witnesses? Why? Good, go. Yes, a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're making up the New Testament story, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet all 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were. In fact, one of their witnesses was a formerly demon-possessed woman. Gee, what a credible witness you got there, huh? They wouldn't be making this up. I actually had a woman come up to me once, and she said, Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. Because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll see it on the news before you hear it from him, right? You'll be watching the news going, hey, hon, what? Oh, yeah, forgot to tell you. The nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner? He's not going to tell you. You think that's bad. I was at the University of Cincinnati almost a year ago, and I got done telling this, and after the presentation, a guy came up to me. He said, oh, you think that's bad? He said, I have a friend who was on an airplane, a private plane, just he and the pilot died. And my friend didn't know how to fly the plane. So just like in the movies, the tower talked him down. And when he got home, his wife said, how was your day, honey? And he said, same old, same old. Not going to tell you. I can't even believe this next verse is in the New Testament, but it is. Do you know at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew 28, when Jesus takes his disciples on the mount, up on the mountain there in Galilee to give them the Great Commission. This is where he says, go, therefore, make disciples of all nations. Notice he doesn't say make believers. He says make disciples. There's a difference. Anyway, as he's giving them the Great Commission, this is the climax of the whole gospel. It says in verse 17, Matthew 28:17, of the disciples watching Jesus, it says of them, some believed, but some doubted. What? He's standing resurrected right in front of them. It's like they're going, you see that guy over there? Yeah. That guy over there is Jesus. No, it can't be Jesus. He was just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you, it's him. It can't be Jesus. He's dead. Oh, it's him. Do you know what the Romans did to him? They whipped him. They brutalized him. They put nails all through him. They put a spear in his side. Blood and water came out. In fact, if they didn't kill him, those Roman soldiers could have been killed themselves. I'm telling you, Jesus is dead. It's him. It can't be. It is. How do you know? The women told me. They're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus in the text. In fact, it says in Mark chapter 3 that his own family thought he was out of his mind. They wanted to seize him and take him home. That's embarrassing. His own brothers don't believe in him. We learn later, however, that James, the half-brother of Jesus, dies as a martyr in the city of Jerusalem in 62 AD. He's thrown off the Temple Mount by the Sanhedrin, and then they stone him to death. And no Bible writer tells us this. You know who tells us this? Josephus, the Jewish historian, who was probably in Jerusalem at the time because he lived from 37 AD to about 100 AD. He tells us that James dies. And so does another writer, Hegesippus, who lived later. James is the pastor of the church in Jerusalem. Why is he dying for his brother when 30 years prior to that he didn't think his brother was God? Because Jesus appeared to James. That's what 1 Corinthians 15, I should say. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 3 to 8. It lists all the people Jesus appeared to, a very early creed. Jesus appeared to James. That must have convinced him. Before Jesus rose from the dead, James said to his brother, yo, bro, you ain't God. After Jesus rose from the dead, he said, yo, bro, you're God. Now, how many people in here have a brother? All right, how many people have a brother who thinks he's God? Yeah, you don't believe in him either, right? Neither did James. Jesus is called a madman. He's called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. You think they invented this? He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, there are two prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Now, do you think Matthew, when he wrote down the genealogy, thought to himself, you know what, I really think I need to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let me put a couple of prostitutes in here, Rahab. No. It's embarrassing. In fact, there's a lot of embarrassing people in the bloodline. Judah, from where we get the term Jew from. Jesus from the tribe of Judah, not a good guy. What did Judah do? He sold his brother Joseph into slavery, and then he slept with his daughter-in-law who was posing as a prostitute, Tamar. And he's in the bloodline of the Messiah. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us then, huh? Bathsheba's in the bloodline. In fact, when Matthew gets to her name in the genealogy, he won't mention her name. What does he say instead? Does anyone know? Uriah's wife. He's telling the truth, but who's Uriah? Uriah is the husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could cover up the crime and have Bathsheba. It's a slam. He's telling the truth, though. You would never find this in another ancient culture. You would never find the historian for any of the pharaohs saying, yeah, I got a couple of prostitutes in your bloodline, and you were a bad guy, and this guy was a bad... No. They would whitewash all that out. In fact, this is true today. I don't care who's in the White House. You know who that press secretary is? That press secretary is just a propagandist. You know that press secretary never admits the president has ever done anything wrong? They try and spin all the time. They try and hide everything embarrassing. But the Bible doesn't hide any of that. This is why, by the way, Dennis Prager, you guys know who Dennis Prager is? Conservative Jewish man. He's not a Christian, just a Jew, but he believes the Old Testament's true. He said, the main reason I believe the Old Testament's true is because no people group would ever invent such an embarrassing history of themselves. And I agree with him. But I would ask Dennis, if embarrassing testimony works for the Old Testament, why doesn't it work for the New? There's a lot of embarrassing testimony in the New Testament as well. There's more in the book. I don't have time. We got to do one more, and that is excruciating deaths. This is another way to show the New Testament writers are telling the truth. These men who were in a position to know whether Jesus had risen from the dead died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by saying, look, it never happened. Remember, all the writers of the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, all of them were Jews. Luke's the only Gentile. The rest of them thought they were God's chosen people. They'd been practicing Judaism through their heritage for almost 2,000 years. And two things they didn't think could happen. They didn't think one guy would rise from the dead in the middle of time, and they didn't think anyone could claim to be God. That was blasphemy. Yet that's exactly what these Jews said happened. In fact, think about it this way. Look at the apostles' beliefs and practices before and after the resurrection. It's stunning the change that they made. Before the resurrection, they believed in animal sacrifice. They'd been slaying lambs to Yahweh for hundreds of years. Then suddenly Jesus comes along and they say, you know, we don't need to slay these lambs anymore because these lambs are just symbols of the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Here he is. Before they believed in a binding law of Moses. Afterwards, Christ's life has fulfilled the binding law of Moses. Before they believed in strict monotheism. Afterwards, they're believing in a Trinity, three persons in one divine essence. Yes, you can see the Trinity in the Old Testament, but it's much clearer in the New. Before they believed in the Sabbath, in fact, they thought they could be stoned for not obeying the Sabbath. Afterwards, they're worshiping on Sunday. And Paul even says in Colossians 2, don't let anyone tell you you'll have to obey any Sabbath or festival day. Why? Because the Sabbath has arrived. The Sabbath was a symbol of rest. And who do we rest in? Jesus. He does all the work. In fact, out of the 10 commandments, 9 of them are repeated in the New Testament as binding on Christians. What's the only one that isn't? Keep holy the Sabbath. Now, that doesn't mean it's not a good idea to have a Sabbath. It's just not obligatory anymore because Jesus fulfilled it. Before they believed in a conquering Messiah, afterwards a sacrificial Messiah. Oh, Jesus will conquer when he comes again. But they didn't see the sacrificial coming. Before they believed in circumcision, afterwards they believed in baptism and communion. Let me ask you one other thing, ladies and gentlemen. If you were inventing a religion, would you ever pick this as your symbol? Circumcision. Who would do this? What do I got to do to join your club? What? I'm out. No, nobody would make this up. Now, what would have caused them to abandon everything on the left and adopt everything on the right virtually overnight? The only thing I can think of is what psychologists call an impact event. What's an impact event? An impact event is an event that occurs in your life that is so dramatic that although you might not remember what you had for breakfast this morning, you'll remember an impact event that happened 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, if you're old enough. And these events can change your perspective 180 degrees. In fact, I don't even know if anyone in this room can answer the question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you can remember where you were and what you were doing November 22nd, 1963, raise your hand and hold it up high. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you see these few people with their hand up? These people are very old. Okay? November 22nd, 1963 is my earliest memory. I was 2 years old in 2 days. Yes, I'm 62 years old now. I know. I don't look a day over 61. In fact, when I turned 50, my wife was very encouraging. She said, honey, you're going to live to be 100. I said, how do you know? She said, because you look half dead already. Anyway, November 22nd, 1963, I'm 2 years old and 2 days. I'm a toddler. I'm standing in our home in Wanamassa, New Jersey, and my mother is on an ottoman in front of a black and white TV, weeping uncontrollably. Mommy, what's the matter? They killed the president. They killed the president. President Kennedy assassinated that day. I never saw my mom cry like that. It was an impact event. I can still see her right now in my mind when she was 26 years old. She's 86 today. But I can see her when she was 26 sitting on that ottoman. It was an impact event. I don't remember anything before that and very little after that. Where were you when the second plane hit the tower? For those of you old enough, I was in my home office in Charlotte, North Carolina. I had seen the first tower had been hit, but I didn't know by what, and the TV was at my back while I'm talking to a pastor on the north side of Charlotte, and we were trying to determine what the topic would be when I came to speak at his church. And I said, do you have the TV on? He goes, yeah. He said, maybe a Cessna or something hit the World Trade Tower. And we're just talking, and suddenly he screams into the phone. He goes, the second tower just got hit. I turned around, look at the TV, the second tower's on fire. I said, was it a Cessna? He goes, no, it looked like a United plane. I said, you saw that? He said it was on live TV. It flew right in there. I said, look, let me call you back. I hung up the phone. For some reason that morning I had CNN on, the communist news network. And I'm not making this up, but the commentator on CNN said this: one has to think there's some sort of navigational error here. He said, navigational error? You dimwit. This is the clearest day in the history of the Big Apple. What do you think, the pilots can't see where they're going? You think Stevie Wonder's flying these planes? I mean, come on. This is terrorism. I called that pastor the next day. I said, we're going to come to your church and talk about Islam because that's what this is related to. Now, 9/11 was over 23 years ago. And those of you who are old enough can remember something about that day. But if I were to ask you, where were you 23 days ago? Most of you are going to go, I don't know, let me look at my iPhone. What was I doing 23 days ago? Why can you remember something from 23 years ago but not 23 days ago? No impact event 23 days ago, impact event 23 years ago. Do you think if Jesus really rose from the dead, that would have been an impact event? I mean, would they have any trouble remembering that this happened? Especially when he did miracles over the next 40 days? No, of course not. They'd have remembered everything. It would have been an impact event. And that's the only way I can figure out why they would have abandoned everything on the left and adopted everything on the right overnight under the threat of death. In fact, you might look at it this way. What did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did they have to gain by saying Jesus claimed to be God and rose from the dead? Well, they got kicked out of the synagogue, then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks, right? You don't join religions that get you that. You don't invent them anyway. And what did the New Testament writers have to gain? They had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. You know, I get the question, and if you're a Christian, maybe you get the question, are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yes. They're all in chapter 9 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. But you know, the question often has an illicit assumption under it. You know what the illicit assumption is? You really can't trust the New Testament writers because you see, these people were biased. You see, they were Christians. You can only trust the non-Christian writers to tell us what really happened. If you think about that for more than 5 seconds, you'll realize how stupid that is. That illicit assumption. Why? What did these people have to gain by saying it was true? Why would they invent this? They wouldn't. They had everything to lose by saying it was true. In fact, my friend J. Warner Wallace, some of you may know this guy. He's a cold case homicide detective that's been on Dateline more than any other homicide detective because he solves murders that are decades old. He also took his detective skills and applied them to the greatest homicide of all time, the homicide of Jesus. So he has a book called Cold Case Christianity and many other books. ColdCaseChristianity.com, worth checking out. Anyway, Jim says that whenever he finds a body that he knows has been murdered, he doesn't have to track down 1,000 possible motivations. He already knows that that guy was murdered for one or more of these three reasons. There was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, or power. Those things can drive people to murder. In fact, those are the same three things that can drive any of us to sin. Why? Because sex, money, and power are good things. In fact, they're so good, we'll often take shortcuts to get them. And so what Jim says, he says, if you're going to say that the New Testament writers invented all this, you've got to find one or more of those three motivators. So let's take a look, ladies and gentlemen. Did the New Testament writers suddenly get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No, they didn't get sex. Did they get money? No, they weren't 21st century prosperity gospel preachers. Did they get power? No, they got the opposite of power. They were persecuted. Paul had power when he was Saul, persecuting the church. As soon as he becomes a Christian, he's the one persecuted. They didn't get sex. They didn't get money. They didn't get power. They had no motivation to make this up. In fact, why would they then go die for a known lie? At this point, you might go, Frank, time out. If you're going to say that martyrdom is somehow evidence for Christianity, don't you have to say it's evidence for Islam? No. Why? Well, there's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times, but let me just look at one major difference for our purposes here. The Muslim martyrs of today, and even the Muslim martyrs of Muhammad's time, didn't witness anything that made them say, oh, this has to be true. They just had faith. The New Testament writers, on the other hand, witnessed Jesus risen. They saw Jesus, they touched Jesus, they ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. Some people will die for a lie they think is the truth. No one will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament writers were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get better evidence than that unless you were there yourself. Now, last thing I'm going to say about this, for those of you in this room that believe the Bible is the inerrant word of God as I do, this is going to sound like heresy, but it's not. Stick with me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we call the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. You say, how can that be? Ladies and gentlemen, do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Yeah, why? Because the people that believed in Christianity didn't read about it in a book. They witnessed the resurrected Jesus. In other words, Christianity did not begin with a book. Christianity began with an event, the resurrection. There would be no series of books written by Jews in the first century claiming a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead unless a man really did claim to be God and really did rise from the dead. Because by saying this happened, it went against all their beliefs and it got them beaten, tortured, and killed. So remember, Christianity did not begin with a book, it began with an event. You wouldn't even have these documents we call the New Testament, written by Jews in the first century, unless something like this happened. In fact, we could put it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. Now, thankfully, they did write it down so we could know about it and orient our lives in accord with it. But it would have been true if they never wrote it down. We just wouldn't know much about it. Do you see the point? The Bible is the result of the event, not the other way around. So there's a lot more evidence, but we don't have time for that. Here are the 4 major points. Does truth exist? If somebody says there's no truth, you're going to say, does God exist? First argument, cosmological. One guy got it. Second argument, teleological, design argument. Third argument, moral argument. From those 3 arguments, we can see there's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created and sustains all things. You don't need the Bible to know this. Are miracles possible? What's the greatest miracle in the Bible? The first verse. Even atheists admit the evidence for the first verse. They don't have a good explanation for how it wasn't God. I think we have a good evidence that it was a being like God. And is the New Testament telling us the truth about the resurrection? We looked at only 2 of 10. And through embarrassing details, embarrassing stories, and excruciating deaths, I think it takes more faith to believe he didn't rise from the dead. Now, if you want to go much further, we brought some books and DVDs, and I want to point out that all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine, okay? Just so you know. I got 3 sons, so I need some help, all right? First of all, take out your phone if you want this entire PowerPoint presentation in a PDF format, because that QR code will take you to a place where I'm going to send you the entire PowerPoint presentation. I maybe showed you 50 slides today. The whole thing is 362. And you're also going to get about 11 other presentations for free. Just follow that code, or you can text the word evidence to this phone number. It'll take you to the same place, 855-909-0582. People watching online can do the same thing. Text the word evidence to 855-909-0582. Now, the books we just brought I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and a DVD set that goes through all this material in about 7 hours in a lot more detail than what we can do here. And we have workbooks you can get on our website, and courses, online courses. And the other book I brought was this one, Correct, Not Politically Correct, about same-sex marriage and transgenderism. This book also talks about why Christians ought to be involved politically. There are no Bible verses in that book. This is not a biblical case. This is the natural law, common sense, medical case why transgenderism and same-sex marriage are not good for individuals and they're not good for societies. You could give that book to an unbeliever, all right? The 3rd edition just came out last year with all the new stuff in there on transgenderism, okay? All right, before we go to your questions, and I'll put this back up later if you missed it. It's true. So what? So what if Christianity is true? Well, the best news of all, ladies and gentlemen, someone actually did die for you. Jesus of Nazareth. Now, when I was in the Navy, which, by the way, stands for Never Again Volunteer Yourself, I was in naval aviation, and I had to earn golden wings, which were fairly hard to earn. But there's nothing more difficult in the Navy to earn than a golden trident. That's what the SEALs earn. Very few people that start SEAL training make it through. Maybe 5%. But those that do make it through wear that trident with pride. It is their identity. When Michael Monsoor was buried in Rosecrans Cemetery in San Diego, California, just about every Navy SEAL on the West Coast showed up for his funeral. And when they passed his casket, they took off their tridents and pressed them into his casket. They took their identity and pressed their identity, put their identity in the one that died for them. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to put our identity in our Savior, the one that died for us. But our culture says, oh, no. Put your identity in your political party, or put your identity in your sexual preference, or put your identity in your job or your bank account. Do you realize, ladies and gentlemen, that all those identities are extremely fragile and temporary? For example, if you put your identity in your sexual preference, what happens when you can no longer sexually perform? You no longer have an identity? Or you're no longer sexually preferred? You no longer have an identity? Or if you put your identity in your job, what happens when you lose your job? You no longer have an identity, or you retire. If you put your identity in another person, what happens when, God forbid, that person leaves you or dies? You no longer have an identity? These are not stable identities. They're temporary. They're fragile. They're not satisfying, ultimately. No, you were meant to put your identity in your Savior, who not only died, but also rose from the dead. Do you realize that Christianity is the only worldview where you don't achieve your identity, you receive your identity? I mean, if you have to achieve it, man, all the pressure's on you, and there's always somebody that can do it better. No, you don't achieve it. You receive it. And you can't lose it. It's eternal. It's stable forever. It's not based on what you do. It's based on what he did. You receive it. You're not only forgiven, you're given his righteousness when you trust in Jesus. Have you ever done that? Why wouldn't you do it? It's free. In fact, do you realize that everyone you love will die, everything you build will crumble, everything you say will be forgotten, everything you do will come to nothing, you and your identity will die and vanish unless the resurrection is true. Everybody in this room will be dead in 100 years, probably a lot sooner. What then? Sexual preference going to save you? Gender identity going to save you? Another person going to save you? Job going to save you? Bank account going to save? No. Wake up. You're here to make a decision. Exactly. He knew. All right, what we're going to do now is go to Q&A, but before we do, Corey, can you come up here and tell people where they can get involved here on campus, because we don't want this to be an event. If you want to go further into this kind of material with a community of people, Ratio Christi is a great place to do it, also BCM, but the Ratio Christi representative is here, Corey. Just tell people, you know, what you do and where you meet and when, so if they want to join, they can. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you guys again for coming. Can y'all hear me? Yeah. Okay, Tuesdays we meet at the BCM Ratio Christi at 5:30. I know also that the BCM gives free lunch on Mondays of 11 and 12. And then there's also Chi Alpha that meets here on campus as well. I don't exactly know what time, but Tony is here if you guys want to get involved with him as well. But we're going to take individual topics that we've talked about tonight and really spend some time, in many cases an hour or two, kind of breaking it down, asking questions. It's for college students, but we have high school age students that join us. We have adults that just come and want to hear the conversations and get involved. So I would love to have you guys show up and get involved. But it's 5:30 at the BCM on Tuesday nights for Ratio Christi, and those topics vary from scientism to the three arguments for God, to what is faith, how is it defined, how is the culture twisted, and we're going to unpack those type of questions and really try and dive deep into those. Chi Alpha, BCM, and Ratio Christi here at McNeese. Thank you guys again.
Thanks, Corey. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go to Q&A now, and since no one likes to ask the first question, we're going to move right on to the second question. Second question at the microphone. If you don't want to be on the internet, don't ask your question. But if you do want to ask your question, you will be on the internet. People are watching right now. But here is the mic, and that's the great Clint Boland setting that up. So we just need one person to start, and then we'll have many more questions. All right. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Jamie Duncan.
Jamie, go ahead, Jamie.
I'm originally from Michigan, and I do a lot of street apologetics and evangelism, and I speak to a lot of Muslims. And so one of the questions that I get is when we're discussing about Jesus, that, you know, when we talk about the deity of Christ, the first question or objections that they have is, well, can you show me explicitly in the Bible where Jesus said he's God? Like, where are those exact words? Now, I have my own kind of thing that I use, but I want to get your take on what do you say when a Muslim says to you, can you explicitly show me those very words where Jesus exactly says that he's God?
Well, if Jesus said that, he probably would have been stoned right away. So No, could you stay up there, Jamie? Because I want to get your insights on this as well. Jesus said it in a Jewish way, many ways. Like, for example, when he said, before Abraham was born, I am. And they picked up stones to stone him because the Jews knew what he meant. He's quoting from Exodus chapter 3, 3:14, I believe it is, where God appeared to Charlton Heston. Remember that? When God appeared to Moses, and Moses says to Yahweh, who should I tell the Israelites you are? And God says, tell them I am sent you. Mm-hmm. So he certainly did it in a Jewish way. He also, in many other ways, claimed to be God, which we don't have time to go into now completely, but he claimed to be the first and the last and the good shepherd, and he also claimed to be the Alpha and the Omega, and he claimed to be one with the Father. I mean, there's so many different ways that Jesus claimed to be God in a Jewish way. And if he had come out a little bit too overtly, he probably wouldn't have been able to complete his mission. So he had to kind of walk a fine line. But there are plenty of places in the New Testament where the New Testament writers claim he's God directly. Like, for example, John 1, Hebrews 1. Colossians 1. Paul even says, I think it's in Romans 9:5, he's God over all. So there are plenty of places it's explained that Jesus is God. And I think you can also turn this on the Muslim. And my friend David Wood, who ministers a lot, as you well know, Jamie, to Muslims, has a video on this on his YouTube channel. I think his YouTube channel is now Apologetics Roadshow, if I'm not mistaken. So you could demand things of the Muslim, how come it doesn't say exactly in these words? Well, those words aren't necessarily the issue. The issue is, does he claim to be God in an equivalent way with other words? And he does. How would you deal with it?
Well, I usually say, so, we're talking about the exact word category. So I say, well, and I go through the evidence of how Jesus is God. He claims the same honors, the same acts, and those kind of things. But then I turn it around to them and I say, well, can you show me in the Quran exactly where Muhammad said that he was Allah's prophet? There's no exact words that say that out of Muhammad's mouth. So, but yet you believe it. Right. So I usually use that argument when I talk to them about that, but I wanted to know what your take was on that.
Yeah, well, the expert I always turn to is David Wood, because he is the best at this. And he and Nabil Qureshi years ago were thrown into jail in Dearborn. Just for,
I was there. I lived right outside, out of there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you know, the Dearborn area is very Muslim, and there are areas that you think you're in Saudi Arabia or something when you go in there.
Our church was actually in Dearborn. So,
was it?
Yeah, so we would go out to the neighborhoods, and we actually had a sheikh that came to our church and said, we do not want you to be proselytizing to our neighborhood. And we're like, this is America, and we preach the gospel here.
Well, that's one of the problems, as you know, with assimilation. When people come to America, some assimilate and others don't. And particularly Muslim groups tend not to assimilate. They stay in Islam. Now, if they think Islam's true, okay, fine. But the problem is, as we know from history and we know from other areas of the world, when Muslims get over 51%, then the freedoms that we enjoy from our Constitution go away. Exactly. That's the problem. They want to implement Sharia law, which is against the United States Constitution. Yeah. So exactly. That can be a problem.
And we did a debate actually in the mosque, and we were sponsored by the Islamic Institute of Knowledge, and we were there, and one person that was on the panel on the other side was actually part of the Dearborn public sphere, and so someone asked him, if someone leaves Islam, is it okay to kill that person? And he said in front of all of us, yes, it is okay to kill that person. And he likened it to being in a war. So you're fighting with your partner, and your partner leaves and goes on the other side. That's how he looks at it. And this guy is actually in public office right now in Dearborn.
That is from Surah 3. That's chapter 3 of the Quran. Yes, you can kill somebody who's left Islam. Now, it doesn't mean every Muslim believes this, but that's what the Quran says. So he's just telling you what the Quran says. And as you know, but maybe the audience doesn't, the more extreme version of Islam believes that There's a house of Islam and a house of war, and if you're not a Muslim, you're in the house of war. You're either going to be killed, or you're going to submit, pay the extra tax until you become a Muslim. So they call it a religion of peace, but when you look at the Quran, you look at history, you look at the behavior of Muhammad, it's not a religion of peace. It spreads largely through force. Not in every area, but in many areas.
Exactly.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Thanks for your work. She happens to go, by the way, she told me earlier, to Dallas Theological Seminary, and she does it from here online, correct? Yes, ma'am. Hi.
My daughter, Carmen, has a question. It's very similar to hers, and we were already walking back, but she really wanted to ask.
Oh, that's okay,
But
Carmen.
it's
Go ahead.
A little bit of a different perspective.
Go ahead, Carmen. All right, hang on. Clint will drop it for you. Now, I warn everybody here that kids always have the best questions. So I might actually claim that we're out of time right now, okay? Because most kid questions I can't answer. I can hardly answer the adult questions. Yes, go ahead, Carmen.
Is Jesus God for the Jehovah's Witnesses?
Say that again. Is Jesus God for what?
The Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh, Jehovah's Witnesses believe Jesus is God? No, they don't.
I think she just has friends and family who are Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they don't believe Jesus was God. They believe he was a God, which of course would imply there are many gods, which is against the Christian worldview. So Jehovah's Witnesses tend to deny that Jesus is God. And they also think you have to do good works to be saved. Now, here's a question that you can ask somebody who says that. Why do we need Jesus at all then? Right? If we can just be good and get to heaven, why would we need a sacrifice for our sins? And as Paul says in Romans 6, you're either saved by grace or by works. One or the other. And we know we can't be saved by works because if God is just, infinitely just, he has to punish us for our sin, and all of us have sinned. So the only way God cannot punish us and remain just is if he punishes a substitute, an innocent substitute in our place, and that innocent substitute can only be Jesus himself because he didn't sin. So that's why Jesus is the only way, and that's why he had to come. If you could get to heaven by being good, you wouldn't need Jesus.
But what about when they say that, like the wages of sin is death, and so when they die, they're paying for their sins?
Okay, but then...
I've heard that before.
Right, but then why would they be resurrected? Why would they have an afterlife? And there's so much in the Bible about the fact that you're also going to, if you have sinned and you don't have Jesus, Jesus talks about this in Luke 12, to whom much is given, much will be required. And that those who know better will be beaten with more blows, and those that know less will be beaten with fewer blows, because that's what justice is. In other words, there will be levels of reward in heaven, and there'll be levels of punishment in hell, because that's what justice requires. So just dying isn't really a punishment completely, because if Hitler dies and just a garden variety unbeliever dies, how is it fair that Hitler doesn't get more punishment than the garden variety unbeliever? It wouldn't be. It wouldn't be just. So there has to be a punishment in the afterlife, not just the fact that we cease to live.
Right. Thank you.
All right. Great question. Thank you, Carmen. Please pray for anybody who is a Jehovah's Witness. I see them all the time. They were at the Baton Rouge airport this morning when we came through. In fact, they were somewhere else today. They stand around with a sign, and they're trying to do good works in order to earn their salvation. And, of course, Christianity says you can't earn your salvation. Well, actually, let me change that, ladies and gentlemen. You can get to heaven by being good. You just got to be perfect your whole life. Too late for me. How about you? Okay, so forget it. You can't. Yes. Hi. Hey, what's your names?
I'm Reagan.
Hey, Reagan.
I'm Bolu.
Blue?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Reagan and Blue.
Okay. So I actually have a question. She just followed me for
All right.
moral support. So it's this question: if a good God exists, then why does He allow bad things happen to good people, like Christians?
Yeah, great question. We have an entire chapter in the book Stealing from God on this, but let me just give you a couple of answers to it. It's a big question, but before I do, can I ask you why you asking that question?
Well, I'm not really asking it for myself, but just because of the people around me and the things they've gone through.
Okay.
And having to walk with them through that, I don't have the answers to why they are going through the things they're going. And I mean, I've heard of, sin and all this, but I don't know how to really pass that on to them. Like, an instance, a friend, sister died, and she was like a full-on servant of God. She loved Jesus. She was the preacher of Jesus in the family, and she died. So that affected my friend, and I didn't know what to say, because we've been following God our whole lives. And that's just one instance. Like, there's so much, but that's just...
I guess the question I would ask, does it show that Christianity's false if somebody dies young? Does it? I mean, do we expect everybody who's a Christian to live to 80 or 90 years old? No. What age did Jesus die?
33?
Yes, about 33, and he never sinned. People die because we live in a fallen world. Of course, Jesus voluntarily took death upon himself in order to take our punishment on himself so we could be saved. But the Bible does not guarantee any of us are going to have a pain-free life. In fact, the opposite. It promises that we will have difficulty. In fact, Jesus said, if they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you. And in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. Paul said, anyone who lives a faithful life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. So there will be difficulty, and sometimes we can't explain why there's difficulty. In fact, let me give you maybe even a more dramatic situation, and maybe some of you have experienced this. Say you're part of a church, and a baby in the church gets sick, right? And, initiate the prayer chain. Let's pray that the baby is healed. And everybody prays, and the baby dies anyway. And you're going, what? Where are you, God? Why did God let this baby die? Well, here's one answer. I don't know why God allowed that baby to die, but I know why God allows babies to die in general, because we live in a fallen world that became fallen because of our own sin, and then Jesus had to come in and rescue us from that. But I know why I don't know why that particular baby died, because I'm locked in this very small sliver of time. I hardly know the past. I hardly even know the present. I can't know the future. Maybe this baby dying today will ripple forward to affect trillions of other events and people, and partially be responsible for causing a great evangelist 500 years from now to rise up and save millions of people. Can I trace all those ripples? No, I can't, but God can. This is why God tells us to trust him. In other words, every event that occurs, for good or bad in this world, affects trillions of other events in the future. We can't trace them all. We can guess, but we don't know why. In fact, everybody in this room, I guarantee you, is here partially because somebody did something evil in the past. You wouldn't even be here. Now, we don't do evil so good could result, but God can bring good from evil. In fact, let me give you an illustration of this. I was at McNeese State University a number of years ago, was going through this presentation, and I knew a militant atheist was in the audience because he sat through the entire 2-hour presentation like this. I mean, he didn't crack a smile once, and I had some pretty good jokes in there, all right? Anyway, when it was time for Q&A, his hand went up. I said, yes, sir. He said, if there is a good God, why doesn't he stop all the evil in the world? I said, sir, that is an excellent question. Maybe because if he did, he might start with you and me, because we do evil every day. Do you ever notice that whenever we start to complain about evil, we always start complaining about somebody else? God, why don't you stop him? Or God, why don't you stop her? We hardly ever say, God, why don't you stop me? Ladies and gentlemen, if God wanted to stop evil at midnight tonight, would you still be alive at 12:01? No, none of us would be. Why does God allow evil? Because he's given us free will. Why has he given us free will? So we could love. The problem is we can also use our free will to do evil. And so one reason evil exists is because he's given us free will to be moral creatures, to make a choice. And if God were to intervene every time we did evil, then we really wouldn't have a choice, would we? He'd be blunting everything we tried to do. And can God bring good from evil? Yes, he does. He brought it through Jesus. That's the greatest good ever came from the greatest evil. And he also does it all the time through the ripple effect. This is why Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4, he says, our light and momentary afflictions are achieving for us a greater weight of glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, for what is seen is temporary. We fix our eyes on what is unseen, for what is unseen is eternal. In other words, when you go through difficulty, when I go through difficulty, it actually enhances our capacity to enjoy God, not only now but in eternity. So difficulty actually can build your character and build your capacity to enjoy God. If you don't go through difficulty, in fact, we'll end it here because we could talk about this forever. If you don't go through difficulty, you'll be a very shallow, selfish person. This is why so many celebrities are so shallow. Why? Because nobody ever says no to them. They get everything they want whenever they want. If they don't get their water at 41.6 degrees, they pitch a hissy fit, right? They're very shallow. You need difficulty in your life. I need difficulty in my life if I'm going to become more like Jesus. In fact, Jesus learned obedience through suffering. If Jesus learned obedience through suffering and he didn't have a sin nature, what about us? Yeah, there's going to be difficulty. God can bring good from difficulty. He promises it in Romans 8:28 when he says, we know that all things work together for good. It doesn't say all things are good. Work together for good to those that love God and are called according to his purpose to be conformed to the image of his Son. The reason you're here is to be conformed to the image of his Son. Not to live a happy life, not to live a pain-free life, not to never experience sickness or ultimately death, but to go through difficulty. In fact, I got to show you one thing before we go, because this was profound. This was from, if I can find it quickly, Dr. Peter Kreeft wrote a book a number of years ago called Making Sense of Suffering. I quote him extensively in the book Stealing from God. And here's what Dr. Peter Kreeft, who teaches at, I think, Boston College, said about the purpose of life. Here it is. The point of our lives is not comfort, security, or even happiness, but training. Not fulfillment, but preparation. This world is a lousy home, but it's a fine gymnasium. Am I answering all your questions? No.
Yeah, not all, but
But we could spend semesters talking about this. If God, why evil? We know it doesn't disprove God because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. So the very fact that there is evil is actually proof for God. But why does he allow certain evils? We don't always know, but we know why we don't know. All right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Blue?
Yeah.
Reagan?
Yes.
All right, God bless you guys. Thank you. All right. Hey, that was a good question. Give him a hand. Come on. Yeah. Yes, sir.
My name is Drew Hester, and
Hey,
I was
Drew.
just curious because I know that we pray, to talk to God and kind of relate with Him. But why pray for something such as, I pray for someone for safe travels, but then they get immediately injured or something. So what's the whole point of me praying for like God, like a genie kind of deal? I don't understand. I pray to God, for a relationship and connection, but why pray for things like a genie? I don't want to use God like that. So I'm curious why.
Well, God tells us to put forth our requests to God, and we're supposed to pray in His will, because even Jesus Himself, right, said, Lord, if there's any other way this cup can pass from me, please have it pass from me. But if not my will, but your will. So He wants us to have dependence on Him, to have this relationship, as you just mentioned, Drew. But can you imagine, what would happen if we prayed and we got everything we wanted every time? What would happen to us?
I think we would get full of ourselves.
Yeah, I think we'd be very shallow, and we would use God, just like you mentioned, a genie. He's not a genie. He is someone that we have a relationship with, and He wants us to depend on Him. But He's not going to give us everything we want any more than a loving parent is going to give a child everything he or she wants. He knows what's best for us, and sometimes what's best for us is pain and suffering, as we just spoke about, right? So, and I agree with you. Prayer, to a certain extent, is a mystery, right? There are questions about prayer that I don't know the answer to. But God tells us to pray, and it does create a relationship with God, and we are to depend on Him and pray for what we want, with the knowledge that what we want might not really be what He wants for our lives. We're supposed to pray in accord with His will. In fact, can you think of something you prayed for in the past that, looking back, you go, gee, I'm glad He didn't answer that the way I wanted it to? I can think of several things. I wouldn't be married to my current wife because I prayed that another woman would be my wife in the past. Thank God that didn't happen. Right? So, thank God. Doesn't Garth Brooks have a song on this? He does. What's that? Thank God for unanswered prayer. Right? Garth Brooks, the theologian. Yeah. So, sometimes we're thankful that He says no. All right?
I've had one similar like that, just like with a relationship with someone like that, so I'm glad it was
Sure.
no as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All right? Thank you so much, Drew.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it. All right. Hey, what's your name?
My name is Braylon.
Hey, Braylon, what's the Lazy Sunday Club?
That's my Sabbath.
All right.
On Sunday.
All right. I like it. All right, go ahead.
My question is, I'm a Christian, of course, but do you know like the one like fundamental reason we need to follow Jesus? Because I've had many churches say, well, He'll supply everything for us, He'll do everything. But in my heart, I feel like that's just the incentive to something greater that I haven't truly understood yet.
The reason you're supposed to follow Jesus is because He is God and He is the Savior. Not just to get from Him certain things, but to get Him. See, the purpose of life is to know God and to make Him known. Jesus actually prays this for us. He's praying for us in His high priestly prayer in John 17, verse 3. In fact, interestingly enough, this verse is the verse upon which Harvard University began. John Harvard was a clergyman. He was trying to train people to be preachers. And it said this institution is founded, this institution is to, I don't know if I can remember it exactly, but this institution is to train young men to know God and Jesus Christ whom He sent. And John 17:3 says, now this is eternal life, that they, meaning us, Jesus is praying for us, that they may know you, God the Father, and Jesus Christ whom you sent. What is eternal life? It's not a quantity of endless time. It's a quality. It's to know God through Christ, and then, if you add the Great Commission in, to make Him known. So the reason you ought to be a Christian is because it's true, and you get Jesus. And you then get to experience what you were made for, to have a relationship with your Creator. And this doesn't come to full fruition until you're glorified in heaven And 1 John chapter 3, verse 2 talks about when we see him, we will be like him. The Roman Catholics call this the beatific vision. You will see God for who he is, and then you will know what you were made for. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Thanks, brother.
All right.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
John,
John, go ahead, sir.
my question is, because you brought up politics within your speech, I was wondering, do you think that church and state should stay separate? Because otherwise you could have situations where you have politicians that may do things, may enact policies or be supporting of policies that are not exactly helpful for everybody in the country, but they believe so and they have the backing of God on their side in their mind. So it becomes like, I guess you can compare it to a Middle Eastern like country that's fully theological with the backing of, well, all on their side.
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by church and state, okay? Do we want a national church? No. But do we want a national morality? Yes. All laws legislate morality. The only question is whose morality, right? Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. So it's unavoidable that we're going to legislate morality. The only question is, what is the source of our morality? Whose morality is it? And when people say, don't impose your morality on me, first of all, I ask them, why? Would that be immoral? See, because they're imposing a morality on me, their own. They're saying I ought not impose ought nots, when in reality, they're saying they can impose ought nots, but I can't. Well, why do they get to do that? But the better answer when someone says, don't impose your morality on me, is this. This isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that abortion's wrong, that rape is wrong, that theft is wrong, that mutilating children is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men, and the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This isn't my morality. This isn't your morality. This just happens to be the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said the Gentiles do not have the law written on their hearts. In other words, when Jefferson started the country through the Declaration of Independence, he said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men were created and endowed by their government. No, he didn't say government. Endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And governments are instituted among men to secure these rights. In other words, government doesn't give you rights. Government's just supposed to ensure that you can exercise your rights. It's supposed to protect your rights, secure your rights. If government were to give you rights, that would mean you don't really have rights, you have preferences, because another government could come in and change their policy, and that would mean you no longer have the right. No. Rights only come from God. Governments are supposed to recognize those. So when we're trying to legislate morality, we don't have to legislate the Bible. We just have to legislate a morality consistent with the Bible that comes from God. Both the Bible and natural law morality come from God. And so we're not requiring any sort of religious test. We're not saying you have to be a Christian to be an American. But we are saying that we have a source outside of ourselves on how we should govern ourselves. Otherwise, I ask people who are atheists, why should I take your opinion on this matter when we have a standard beyond us, an unchanging standard that is the right and true standard? This is what our country was founded on. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of times it's a confusion of religion and morality. We're not trying to legislate religion. We're not trying to tell people where, when, how, or if to worship. That would be legislating religion. But we can't avoid telling people how they ought to treat one another, and that's legislating morality, and everybody's trying to do that. The only question is, whose morality are they trying to legislate? And I don't want to legislate mine. I don't want to legislate yours. I want to legislate thee. And Christians, if we're going to love our neighbor, and we should, ought to be involved in politics. Are only atheists qualified to run the country? Where do we come up with that lame idea? If we're going to love one another, love our neighbors, we should use our influence to try and ensure that laws are put in place to protect innocent people from evil and to promote the good. That's why we have a government at all, to protect innocent people from evil. Why shouldn't Christians be involved in that? We should. In fact, we are not loving our neighbor if we're not involved in politics. We're allowing bad laws to be put in place that hurt our neighbor. So we have to be engaged. In fact, I have an entire YouTube on this, on our YouTube channel called Does Jesus Trump Your Politics? It's free. I go through both platforms, Republicans and Democrats, show you where they stand on the more important matters of the law, something I mentioned earlier. And then you look at that, you compare that to the Bible, and you say, who's closest on the more important matters of the law? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, great question. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Hi, what's your name?
Hannah.
Hey, Hannah.
All right, so this might sound, I was sitting there for like 20 minutes trying to figure out how to make this more concise.
That's okay.
But he actually had a great, that actually really helps me a lot. So when you were up here and you were talking about, what I'm about to say might sound confrontational, and it's not necessarily
That's
what
all right.
I
I'm from New
believe.
Jersey. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm from New Jersey. Go right ahead. Call me a name. It's fine.
So when you were up here and you were talking about, I mean, I like what you said about I'm not legislating my morality, I'm legislating what your God said.
Yeah.
Anybody who believes anything could stand up here and say that these ideas aren't mine, they're from this source or this source or this source or this source.
That's right, yeah.
And people believe what they believe, whether it's from they went to an event like this and they got their minds changed, or whether it's something they grew up with their entire lives. They believe what they believe normally very strongly. There's some people who don't have very strong beliefs, but most people believe what they believe based off their experiences and everything very, very strongly. They've got logical reasons and emotional reasons, and some of those things you might never be able to change.
Right.
And the problem lies, and this is less in the scope of like every religion or every belief or whatever, and more in the context of just different like denominations of Christianity. The problem arises when like Joe says he believes this and that, and the other person interprets this a different way, and somebody else interprets it in a different way, and somebody else interprets it a different way, and they're all claiming that it's what God says. Because I have people in my life who I disagree with who come up to me and say, I believe this, I had a spiritual thing that said that this is the thing, and I have to disagree with them on that, right? I'm not sure if this is making sense.
Are you trying to get at how do we decide what God really wants on certain policy issues? Is that your question?
Less from the political side of things and more like in my life, I know how I'm interpreting certain things, and I believe those, I have a piece about them. I don't think they're wrong, but I do know a lot of people have a piece about what they interpret, and they claim that it's what God says, and those beliefs are either very dangerous or very misleading, or they're hurting other people, they're setting other people up for failure, they're misrepresenting what I believe the Bible to say, or they're, at the very extreme end, they are gone on to hurt people so much that those people have now turned away from the church or turned to other things. And I do think that as I've grown over, because I grew up in the church, but as I've grown up, I understand why people feel so angry about some of the things that religion has done. And I didn't used to understand that.
Yeah, let's just deal with that part, because that's probably more prevalent among people watching right now. You know, what about church hurt and that kind of thing? John Dixon, who's a PhD, now teaches at Wheaton University, recognizes that a lot of people have been hurt by the church by so-called Christians. In fact, he wrote a book called Bullies and Saints, where he goes through the entire history of the church over 2,000 years. He devotes a chapter per 100 years to what was done well by the church and poorly by the church. And he asks people to consider this question for people who have been hurt by the church. Think about this. He says, when somebody plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame?
The player.
Yeah, you don't blame Beethoven, right? So when somebody plays Jesus poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Jesus. look, just because I'm not true and beautiful doesn't mean Jesus isn't true and beautiful, right? And I know it's a newsflash to some people, but Christianity is not Christians. Christianity is Jesus. So keep your eyes on Jesus. None of us are perfect. We all need a Savior. So when somebody calls me a hypocrite, Hannah, I agree with them. You're right, I'm a hypocrite. I can't live up to what Jesus said and did. But if I could, I wouldn't need him. If I was perfect, I wouldn't need a Savior. In fact, when people say I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal. We got room for one more.
Yep.
Right? We're all hypocrites. We're all sinners. And the church is a hospital for sinners. It's not a country club for saints. In fact, to say I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there would be like saying I can't go to the gym because there's too many out-of-shape people down there. Right? That's why they're at the gym. And one of the reasons you're at church is hopefully to become more like Jesus. So it doesn't blunt the truth of Christianity to say people have done evil and people who claim to be Christians have done evil. Maybe they were Christians and they sinned, or maybe they claimed to be Christians but really weren't. But don't keep your eyes on them. Keep your eyes on Jesus.
I do think the issue with that is that different groups claim that this Jesus is different. And I guess it's just the question of that applies to any group. Any group can have bad apples. Any group can have people who do things. But where are the teachings that are being taught to a group that may make that group more likely to be dangerous?
One of the benefits we have living 2,000 years after Jesus is we have 2,000 years of
war in history.
Well, no, actually, that's not true. Because only 7% of the wars in history were caused by religion, and if you take Islam out, only 3%.
I meant in general as in like people.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm going in another direction here. What I'm saying here is that we've had the great theologians of the past and the early church fathers, and of course Jesus and the apostles themselves, come up with different creeds and different commentaries on the scriptures. And the bottom line is this: the main things are the plain things, and the plain things are the main things. And if we are now, 2,000 years later, coming up with different interpretations that nobody has had for 2,000 years, it's probably not true. This is why the movement today that says, for example, homosexual behavior is approved by the scriptures is completely bogus. I know people want that to be the case, but it's just not the case. And so I don't buy the idea that the scriptures are so obscure that you can come up with any interpretation you want on the big things and say, you got the word from God. No, let's be honest. We know what they say. Yeah, there are areas we may not agree on, but they're tertiary. But we know what's going on the main things. But I got to move on, Hannah. Thank you so much. Good question. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Hi, I did have a question, but I
Go
also
ahead.
just wanted to comment. Just based
Well,
off what you said.
if we can, let's go to questions.
I'll be really, okay.
Okay, because we got a lot of people waiting. So go ahead. A quick comment and then question. Go ahead.
You'll know false teachers by their fruit.
Mm-hmm.
If their interpretation, if you want to figure out if it's wrong, look at the fruit of their life. But the question I have, and I'll try to keep it very quick and simple, but I see a lot of like atheist arguments and a lot of agnostic arguments of, people just saying like, I don't need an organized religion or I don't need a book to be a good person. And my question is like, how would you respond to that?
My question is, why do you think the purpose of life is to be a good person? And what do you mean by good?
I guess in their context, like, be a good person, a charitable person, a nice person, like.
Why is that? Who said that's the purpose of life?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and what's their standard of good? What does that mean?
Yeah.
You know what Jesus said? There's none good but God. So when anyone says they're a good person, they're actually disagreeing with Jesus. And I don't know about you, but Jesus, since he's risen from the dead, I'm going to follow him. And if he says nobody's good but God, I'm not good. Maybe I'm slightly better than other people in certain areas, and they're better than me in other areas, but so what? I'm still assuming a standard. I've fallen short of that standard. That's why I need a savior if justice exists, and justice does exist. People are screaming for justice everywhere. Justice can't exist unless God exists. So I don't want justice in the afterlife. I want grace. Does anyone in here want justice? No, we should want grace. So I think people who say that, first of all, they don't understand what Christianity is about. They don't understand what the purpose of life is about. They have no standard by which to even judge what good or bad is, and they're assuming that the purpose of life is to generally be nice by whatever their own standards are. Who said they're right?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir, what's your name?
My name is Turek.
Hey, Truett, go ahead.
And I was wondering, how would you deal with non-believing friends and how to plant a seed in their shoe?
Well, I think what you just said is what you want to do. There's a number of things you can do with somebody who's not a Christian. First question I might ask them, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? If they hesitate or say no, it's not a head problem, it's a heart problem, as we talked about earlier. They don't want it to be true. What can you do with such people? I think there's at least 4 or 5 things you can do. Number one, you can love them, which doesn't mean you approve of everything they do, as we mentioned earlier, right? Yes. Love seeks what's best for the other person, not just whatever the person wants. Secondly, you can plant seeds every now and then that show them their worldview is false and Christianity is true. You can't do this too often or they're going to get annoyed. But every once in a while you can do that. Thirdly, of course, you can pray for them. You should always pray. Fourthly, you can wait. Why wait?
God's timing.
Yeah, because, well, let me ask you guys a question in here. Those of you guys who are Christians, were you always a Christian? No. No, you weren't always a Christian, right? There was a process you went through to become a Christian. And none of us in here should expect everybody to be where we are right now. Why? In fact, you shouldn't expect anybody to agree with you. Why should you? You didn't agree with you maybe 5, 10, 20, 30, however many old years, 30 years ago. I didn't agree with myself, I didn't agree with myself 40 years ago. My 62-year-old self is different than my 22-year-old self. So you just need to wait. If you stay in their lives, if they're ever open to Christianity, it might be that your phone's going to ring and they're going to be on the other end. Like, for example, maybe some tragedy strikes. It strikes all of us at some point. If they're ever open, it might be then. Your phone's going to ring and it's going to be them. Because they know you're a person of spiritual depth. Because you've demonstrated it for so long. Are they going to call their atheist buddy when things go wrong? No, what's the atheist buddy going to say? Stuff just happens. There's no rhyme or reason to it. No, they're going to call you a person of spiritual depth. So when the student is ready, he will summon the teacher, and that will be you. So, plant seeds, pray, love them, and wait.
Thank you.
But don't forget to ask the question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
Yes, sir.
All right?
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Truett. Yes, sir.
Hey. My question is, first of all, thank you for being here.
Yes,
and,
sir.
Love apologetics, hoping to go to...
Wait a minute, these guys are leaving. Can't you stay for 6 hours? What's going on? Where's your devotion? Sorry, go ahead. We just got a couple more questions. Go ahead.
Hoping to go to Edinburgh to do some apologetic street work at the university there next year. That's
good.
my fundraising plan, but I'm not advertising.
Yes.
But what I wanted to say was, in apologetics, over the years, I'm glad to know that there's somebody else 62 in the room that blessed me. But I've watched people that have gotten involved in sideline dogmatic type apologetics, and they get completely immersed in the argument, and it's all about winning.
Right.
And I just wondered if you had some, the whole Word of God is inspired by the Spirit of God that lives in us. And so we have this keeper, But is there any advice that you would give that would kind of help somebody who is immersing themselves in defending the faith to avoid?
Oh, well, don't win the argument and lose the person.
Right.
Right? That's why I always ask them, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And I'm going to let the secondary and tertiary issues go, right? I'm going to concentrate on the salvation issues. And so our ministry doesn't take strong positions on secondary or tertiary issues. like eschatology. I mean, I have my own personal opinion on it, but I'm not going to require somebody else to agree with me on eschatology, end times.
Last thing I'd argue about.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, good, very good. Yeah, last thing I'm going to argue about. In fact, when people say, when do you think Jesus is coming back? I always say, look, I'm not on the planning committee, I'm on the welcoming committee, right? Okay? When he comes, we win. I'm just going to welcome him, all right? Yes. I'm not going to go to the mat over the age of the earth, right? Because I don't think it's an essential issue. I have my own view. I think the evidence is better for an old earth, but if you want to believe in a young earth, okay, fine. Okay, it's not a salvation issue. Even Ken Ham would agree with that. Even though he takes a stronger view on it, he knows it's not a salvation issue. Right. I'm not going to argue about secondary and tertiary issues. I recommend to all the people that go through our training who become apologists, you want to stay on the big issues that really matter. And don't create your whole ministry on a secondary or tertiary issue. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. All right. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I want to just say, I just recently discovered your platform. I've learned a lot from you. And so one statement, I consider you the Charlie Kirk of apologetics. I hope that's a compliment.
Well, actually, thank you. Charlie's a good friend of mine, and Charlie Kirk is a great apologist himself. In fact, there was a video that he sent me today. He was at North Texas University last week, and he has a young girl there asking him a question, and he did a wonderful job of pointing out. It just was posted a few hours ago. You can go to his YouTube channel and see it. He does a wonderful job on apologetics as well. He and I kind of put our heads together on some of that stuff. But, yeah, he's very good. But, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, which brings me to my question. So, I very much respect, your knowledge and experience. I'm very fascinated with some NDE stories I've seen.
Yes.
So is there a biblical basis for that? Does God use that as a tool to reveal himself, or is that something else?
Well, the Bible doesn't talk about near-death experiences, but Dr. Gary Habermas, who's the top scholar in the world probably on the resurrection, is also an expert in NDEs. And he says there are at least 300 veridical NDEs. Now, what's a veridical NDE? A veridical NDE is one you can verify, whereby, if a kid says, I saw my grandmother, I was dead and I saw my you can't verify that. But when some guy who's on an operating table flatlines and they bring him back and he says, I was over the hospital, my soul was over the hospital, and I saw there was just an accident between a red Chevy and a blue Tahoe at 3rd and Main. And then the doctors verify later that's exactly when there was an accident out there, and this guy was on the table the whole time. In other words, there's remote viewing going on. Does this prove Christianity? No, but it's another reason to disbelieve naturalism, right? That you're not just a brain, you're also a soul. You're not just a body, you're also a soul. You're not just a brain, you're also a mind. When you can verify remote viewing, you know that there's a difference between your body and your soul, and that your soul can actually be conscious separate from your body. So NDEs can only go so far, and a lot of atheists are very wary of them because many of them are veridical, and it shows beyond any reasonable doubt that naturalism's false. There's other reasons to believe naturalism's false, but this is a relatively recent development over the past 50 or so years. And these are in academic journals, these veridical NDEs. All right. So GaryHabermas.com, if you go there, he has a whole section on NDEs.
I will look that up.
Near-death experiences. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Great question. All right. All right, yes, hi, what's your name?
Sadie.
Hey, Sadie.
Can you still be a Christian and not believe Jesus is God?
Can you still be a Christian and not believe Jesus is God? I think you can be mistaken about it if you just don't understand how Jesus can be God.
Like you think he's not God, like whatsoever?
Well, if you do that, then you're basically a Jehovah's Witness, and
Like,
that wouldn't be considered a Christian.
Would be like a Mormon saying Jesus is not God.
Well, Mormons are even further out theologically than Jehovah's Witnesses. Officially, Mormons are polytheists. They don't think there's one God. They think the God of this universe was once a man who graduated and became a god, and there are a number of other gods out there. And if you're a faithful Mormon man, you can one day be a god of your own planet. I'm not making this stuff up, by the way, okay? And so Mormonism has more theological oddities than even Jehovah's Witnesses do. But if you're going to deny that Jesus is who he said he was, Jesus' big question to everyone was, who do you say that I am, right? To deny that Jesus was who he said he was in many different ways. In fact, we had this question earlier. I'm just trying to see if there's a visual representation of this that I can share with you. I don't know if I have it in here or not. Stand by for a minute. Talk awkwardly amongst yourselves. Okay. I don't know if I have that one slide I wanted to show you guys, but I have every slide but the one I want to show you. Jesus says things like this. Before Abraham was born, I am. Anyone who believes in me will never taste death, or something like that, right? He says, before Abraham was born, I am. Pray in my name, right? I and the Father are one. I'm the Alpha and the Omega. Actually, that's from Revelation. There are so many statements of Jesus that show he's not just a good moral teacher, that he's something beyond what just a human being would be. In fact, there is a great quote from C.S. Lewis that if I can find, I'll show you, because Lewis points out that Jesus isn't just a human teacher. Here's what he said. He said, I'm trying here to prevent anyone from saying the really foolish things that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who is merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would rather be a lunatic on the level with a man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God, but let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. So, I think if you are honest and you study the scriptures and you see what's in there, I don't think you can honestly say Jesus wasn't God. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Great question. All right. All right, these are the last two questions right here. Yes, go ahead. What's your name?
I'm Matthew.
Hey, Matthew, which means gift from God. Here he is right here. Matthew, gift from God.
Thank you. So do you think the existence of sentient extraterrestrial life would impact Christianity at all, and why?
I'm not sure we have intelligent sentient life here. No, I don't think it would impact it at all. In fact, the Bible actually says there are angels on other planets. But the fact that there might be sentient life on other planets wouldn't affect Christianity at all. So I don't see any problem with it. Although, despite the fact that some estimates say that the number of stars in the universe are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth times 100,000, that all the parameters that would be required to get carbon-based life are so remote that even with all that land, all that space, all those stars and all those planets out there, many scientists say, no, this is the only place life is. Now, can they be absolutely sure? No. But this is part of the fine-tuning of the universe, that this appears to be an extremely special place. All right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Hi,
Hi, Brittany.
Hey, Brittany.
So I teach high school, public school. I consider it my mission field. And I teach the gifted population, so it's those on the very high level spectrum, highly intellectual students. I encounter many who are strictly intellectual, so atheism is my audience oftentimes. And there have been several times where I've been asked a question. They've been raised with no faith whatsoever, and before or after the bell, not during school, but there have been times where they've asked, where do I start? And so my response is always, you know, like, you can pray and have a conversation just like you and I are having a conversation. Start with the Gospels, pick, you know, one of the, but beyond that, like, how, is there a particular way to approach someone that's highly intellectual, the best way, like the best direction to give them that's brief enough to not scare them off, you know, or anything, where they can just take that and we might not ever speak of it again, or they might come back to me? Like, what's the best
I would
approach?
ask, do you believe that every effect has a cause?
Okay.
Okay. As I said before, the reason I think God exists is because I know him by his effects. So this universe is an effect. It had a beginning. The design of the universe and the design of the student himself or herself is an effect, which requires a designer. There's a right and wrong moral law in the heart. That's the effect. The cause must be a moral law giver. The very fact that we can reason is an effect. The cause of that would be a great mind. The fact that Jesus appears to have risen from the dead, that's an effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause like God. So these people are thinkers, and I think pointing out that there has to be a cause for every effect. Now, the question is, you can't go on an infinite regress of effects. Eventually, you're going to get back to an uncaused first cause, and that's what we mean by God. God is the uncaused first cause. He is the ground of all being, and in the Bible, this being is called the great I am. What does I am mean? It means I had no beginning, I will have no end, I just be. I'm just the ultimate being. And I think if you start there, and then you can point out that our country assumed that when it said we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're created and we have certain rights, they're getting to the foundation of reality. You can also ask them, if there is no God, why does anything exist? Nothing would exist unless God existed first, and then everything else could exist beyond that. So I would go to cause and effect with such people.
Okay.
And you could recommend a book like I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. I don't know how old they are, but...
They're juniors in high school.
Oh, well, they can handle that, certainly. Or they could just go to our YouTube channel
Okay.
and start seeing some of the stuff there. Also, J. Warner Wallace, the cold case homicide detective, he's very technical. And they might like detective stuff, right?
They do like cold case.
Yeah, cold case stuff. So cold case Christianity would be good for them. Hugh Ross is very good for intelligent folks. He's a astrophysicist and has a website called reasons.org.
Okay.
So any of these sites are going to be good for someone who's focused on facts.
Okay. Thank you so
All right.
much. Appreciate
That is a great question. Thanks for teaching them, by the way. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, why don't you know that we're doing a couple more events. We're going to be at a high school. Hey, Ralph, what's the name of the high school again? What is it called? Little Cypress, Mauriceville, tomorrow night. It's about 30 miles that way, 60 miles that way? West. And all right, and then the next night we're at Lamar University. All this is on our website, crossexamined.org. So thank you for being here. Also want to mention the folks out there watching. We'll be live streaming those events as well. And for those of you that like what we do all this through your donation. So if you feel led, you want to fuel us to go to other college campuses, because we don't charge students anything, go to crossexamined.org and click donate. All right, folks, thank you so much. Thanks for being here. God bless.